So very excited tonight because I happen to love Italy, and I like Italians are almost pretty much like Jews. The family, the food, the whole works. So they're very Jewish, So. But anyway, we're talking tonight about the Jews of Italy, and this is really an introduction. It's a three-part series. We're going to be talking about Rabbi Mordechai Luzzatto. He's really going to be the main focus of what we are talking about. But tonight I want to give some geographical, historical, and ethnic background to Rabbi Mordechai Luzzatto by talking about Italy, which is where he was born and raised and taught. And the next week, I think it's next week, we'll be talking about the biography of Rabbi Mordechai Luzzatto, details of his life, the works that he wrote, etc. We could actually, if we just read the works that he wrote, it would take the entire hour. So we're just going to briefly run through them. And then the next week, we're going to talk about some ideas that Rabbi Mordechai Luzzatto taught us, some central and beautiful ideas of Rabbi Mordechai Luzzatto's unique brand of what I might call rationalist Kabbalah. The rationalist mysticism, which I know sounds like a bit of a contradiction, but that's what he was. So let me start with Italy. So, of course, before this is the Art of Titus. I don't know if you can see that, but the first Jews in Italy. There is, by the way, one of the commentaries, the Radak, Rav David Kimchi, maintains that there already were Jews in Italy pre-First Temple era. There were already Jews in Italy before the First Temple was built. He says there was a civil war amongst the Jews. You may not be aware of this, but in the times before there was a king in Israel, there was a civil war in which the tribes united and fought against the tribe of Benjamin. There was a terrible crime. There was a rape that occurred and followed by, and consequently a murder, and that occurred in the tribe of Benjamin. And the Jews were just rose up against Benjamin to make war against. So I'm not going to go into it now, but it's a long and terrible story. And as a result of this war, Rav David Kimchi tells us there were Jews who were refugees from the tribe of Benjamin who escaped north from Israel, went overland to Italy, and settled in Italy. So that's the earliest mention in any source, as far as I know, of Jews in Italy. The next time you find it is during the Maccabean period. You're going to be celebrating Hanukkah very soon. As you know, Hanukkah was the revolt of the Jews against the Hellenists, who were of the Greek-Syrian Empire, the Seleucids from Syria. Syria, modern-day Syria, used to be the Seleucid part of the Seleucid Empire, which was basically Hellenistic, and they invaded Israel. The Maccabees revolted against them. So the Maccabeans, of course, had fought against the Greek empires, and the up-and-coming empire following the Greeks was, of course, Rome. So Judah Maccabeus and his descendants sent ambassadors to Rome. So there was a Jewish presence in Rome from the Maccabean period, which is, we're talking about approximately 2,400 years ago, 2,300 years ago, 2,200 years ago, 2,100 years ago. It was about a 200-year period, 250-year period of the Maccabean period, from about 2,250 years ago till about 2,000 years ago. And during that time, there were Jews, if there were ambassadors of this community going to Rome, obviously there's going to be Jews following them. There's going to be Jews doing trade with Rome, and there's going to be eventually Jews settling in Rome. The original community of Jews in Rome were poor. They spoke Greek, did not speak Latin. Most people actually spoke Greek at that time in Rome, and they were living in Rome. The Romans were not really too aware of Jews and Judaism. They considered us a fairly backward, bizarre religion. There was no major anti-Semitism. They just thought we were weird. They had a certain respect for the temple in Jerusalem. In fact, I have a book at home, which is a doctoral thesis by someone at Hebrew University, which is fascinating. It is a collection of every single law that was legislated in the Roman Senate regarding the Jews. So all the various laws, and you find actually there were ups and downs. Julius Caesar, who was the most liberal and the most pro-Jewish of the Roman Caesars. The Jews mourned his passing. He promulgated numerous laws. One of them, for instance, there was a time they did grain distribution in Rome on certain days of the week. And one of the days of the week was Shabbat. So they had special dispensation to allow the Jews to collect grain from the distribution centres on a different day of the week because of Shabbat. And also festivals. The people had to pay special taxes. The Jews were allowed to continue sending money to the temple in Jerusalem from Rome. So there were also Caesars who were more oppressive. There were some who were less oppressive, but it was not terrible. Unfortunately, eventually, the Romans, who actually were more or less invited into Israel by the Maccabeans, came into Israel. They were not gracious guests. They tended to take over. I've had guests like that at my house, right? And you have so they had revolt. There were a number of revolts against Roman rule. 3 revolts against Roman rule, and this of course created a lot of anti-Jewish sentiment amongst the Romans. And the 3rd revolt was put down by the Emperor Vespasian, Titus and then Vespasian, who put down the revolt very brutally, and as a result of this destroyed the 2nd temple in Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple, Beis Hamikdash in Jerusalem, and the Jews the Jewish independence was completely destroyed at that time. Even after that, there were some more minor revolts after that. The Romans then destroyed the temple, utterly plowed over the site, and built a pagan city, Roman city, on the site of Jerusalem called Aelia Capitolina. If you go to Israel today, in the old city, there's a place called the Cardo, which is lots of souvenir shops, basically. But it's in an old Roman mall, and that was the central mall of the city of Aelia Capitolina. Vespasian, as was the custom then, it was quite normal. You'd take the people who you conquered, and prisoners of war would be sold as slaves and brought back to your capital. So many, many Jews were brought back to Rome and to many Roman areas, to the Roman Empire, and sold as slaves. So there was now an increase in the Jewish community in Rome, mostly slaves, but many Jews went to Rome together with the Roman army. Jews travelled with the Roman army, they did business, they supplied the Roman army. You wanted to survive, you had to survive economically. This is one of the things that was done. And so, as the Roman Empire spread, the Jews spread. Paul Johnson, in his book History of the Jews, maintains that there were certain periods where about 10% of the Roman Empire was Jewish. And Jews really all over the Roman Empire. Now, when the Jews came to Rome, this is probably the most ancient monument of the Jews in Rome. It's not a monument of the Jews, it's really an anti-Jewish monument. This is, of course, the infamous or famous Arch of Titus, where it says on it, erected by the Roman Senate and the people to deify Titus Vespasian Augustus, son of the deified Vespasian. And on this, actually, maybe if we can shut the lights, because you probably can't see this too well. Oh, it's very dark, but you're okay with that? I think you can see it much better now. There, you can see very clearly, taken with my BlackBerry, it's not a bad photo, right? You can see there Jewish slaves coming into Rome with the menorah of the temple. And in front of them, it's a little harder to see. Actually, you can see it there. You see that? They're carrying a type of a frame, and on the frame there are 2 trumpets. You know, in the temple they blew trumpets. So here, being carried into Rome, are the Jewish slaves carrying the loot from the temple into Rome. The Roman Jewish community would have had a custom never to walk under the Arch of Titus. The only time they did was in 1948, when the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel, where they danced under it singing Hatikvah. So anyway, we find in the Talmud there were many rabbis visiting Rome. Here we have, for example, Rabbi Elazar ben Yossi said, I saw the parochet. The parochet was the curtain in front of the Holy of Holies. He said, I saw the parochet in Rome, and on it there were on it a number of drops of blood. He mentions this because when they took the blood of the offering, there's a question whether it was on the floor in front of the curtain or on the curtain itself. He says, what do you mean? I was in Rome. I saw drops of blood on the curtain from the temple. And here, the Talmud says, they're talking about the tzitz, which was the plate that was on the forehead of the high priest, which said on it, holy unto God. And they were discussing, how was it written? Was holy written above God, below God, next to God's name? How? And he says, Rabbi Elazar ben Yossi said, I saw the tzitz of the high priest in Rome, and holy unto God was written on one line. It said, Kodesh LaHashem. So he saw this in Rome. Talmud in Avodah Zarah says, the embalmed face of Rabbi Yishmael, the high priest, who was very, very handsome, the daughter of Caesar, asked her father not to kill him. She said, I want him as my slave. He's so handsome. he said, "I've got to kill him, but you can have his beauty." So they took off his face and they embalmed it, and they made a death mask of his face, and she took it to Rome with her. And the Talmud tells us that the face of Rabbi Shmuel is in Rome, and Rashi, who lived in the 11th century in France, writes, and it's still found in the treasure houses of Rome. To what he is referring here is unclear, but Rashi says that in his time, in the 11th century, the mask, the death mask, I think they call it, of Rabbi Yishmael was still in Rome. And here the Medrash Rabbah says that I saw the broken pieces of the royal throne of King Solomon in Rome. Now, how would they see these in Rome? Answer is, Josephus tells us that he says that Vespasian erected a temple of peace. Very ironic name for it. This is straight out of George Orwell. The Temple of Peace was the place where the Romans displayed all the loot that they'd taken from countries they'd conquered in war. So I guess they were in peace at the moment, Pax Romana, and they were under. So this is where they displayed it all. So if you were going to, and Josephus Flavius writes, in that shrine were accumulated and stored all objects, for the sight of which men had once wandered over the whole world, eager to see them, severally while they lay in various countries. Here too, he laid out the vessels of gold from the temple of the Jews, on which he prided himself. Josephus Flavius, the Jewish War. So in Rome, there was the Temple of Peace, and the rabbis very often went to Rome. We find delegations of rabbis going to and from Rome. We find many rabbis some rabbis lived in Rome. So again, a little increase. First you had the Jews who were maybe refugees from Benjamin. Then you had the ambassadors of the Maccabeans and others who came with them. You then had the Jewish war, the prisoners of war and the slaves sold in the Roman Empire brought to Rome. Then you had Jews who settled in Rome for economic reasons and political reasons. And then you had maybe people who were visiting Rome going back and forth. And of course, if you've got communication back and forth, obviously people are going to end up living there and staying there. And so there was a small Jewish Roman community. Just put in here as an article from the Biblical Archaeology Review that the Colosseum was actually, it is believed by some archaeologists, that the money for the financing the Colosseum was actually from the sale of the loot from the temple in Jerusalem. Very tragic, but very possible. That's actually me battling a gladiator just outside the Colosseum in Rome. You pay a few lira and you get a photo with a genuine.
Who was winning?
Modesty forbids me from saying. Anyway, now other remnants of the Jews of Rome are, of course, their graves. These are the catacombs underneath Rome. They're a catacomb. Burial in ancient times amongst the Jews and amongst many people was a little different than today. What they'd do is they'd take the person's body and they'd put them in a slot in the wall in these burial caves. Once the flesh had rotted and there was just bones left, they'd collect the bones and they'd put them into what's called an ossuary, which is a smaller stone box, and then they'd put the box into a catacomb or a grave. So it was a little different, quite different than today. And you had under Rome, you have a vast system of catacombs that contain graves of many people. We know that many of them are Jewish graves. As you can see, virtually all the Jewish graves have a menorah. Although it's interesting, these Jews were somewhat assimilated. You don't find Hebrew texts on the Jewish graves. You find things written in Latin and just a menorah to indicate that it's a Jew. You go to a Jewish cemetery today. There are a lot of graves which don't have any Hebrew on them. They're all in English, but there may be a Magen David or something. So here, the Jews of Rome. Also, you see various inscriptions, again, all in Latin. No Hebrew whatsoever, but nevertheless menorahs to indicate that these are Jews. This is the most elaborate one. You can see quite a few Jewish symbols here. You see, of course, the menorah of the temple. And what do you see here? Looks to me like an etrog, I guess. But again, a very elaborate grave in the catacombs under Rome. So the Jews living around for a while. Of course, the downturn came when the Roman Empire became what's called the Holy Roman Empire, and became, under Constantine, it became Christian. So once it became Christian, we now had, instead of just political opposition or you now had religious anti-Semitism. Now the Jews were despised because we, you name it, we killed God, we killed Jesus, we were responsible, we're the Satan, and his blood be upon us, all the stuff that's there in the New Testament. So the Jews became hated, and there became a more oppressive type of statutes on the Jews. Here, by the way, you see this is an inscription from ancient Rome. It's a little difficult to. Well, it's in Latin, and it says pretty much village or area of the Jews. So this was an area. This is actually in the catacombs. So obviously, village is a literal translation. It means the area of the Jews, the Jewish area of the catacombs. Later on, when Italy, when the Roman Empire or the Holy Roman Empire, the rise of the papacy, so Jews' fortunes were up and down amongst the popes. There were some popes who were quite liberal and generous to the Jews. In fact, there are at least 8 or 9 popes who wrote. I don't know what to describe it as, but they wrote an edict proclaiming that the blood libel was false. At least 8 to 10 popes who said the blood was false, but there were many popes who were not so generous towards the Jews. The first ghettos were established in Italy, in fact in Venice. Here is a street, well it's actually, looks like a street in areas of New Jersey just a few months ago. But anyway, this is actually in Venice, and that is part of the Jewish ghetto in Venice. And here is a synagogue, on the upper story, that's actually a synagogue crammed in on the top floor of a building in the Jewish ghetto in Venice. So Jews were confined to the ghettos. Depending on the area of Italy, there were various expulsions of Jews from different parts of Italy. Unfortunately, in the 14th, 15th century, the Inquisition came to Italy. So much of Italy, Jews suffered under the Inquisition. There were parts of Italy it was not a united country, as you know. So there was the Kingdom of Naples and Venice. They were all separate. So the Jews enjoyed rights in some areas of Italy, not in other areas. And again, it was very much up and down during this time. There's Via Synagoga, the synagogue street, but you have synagogues were built in Italy during periods where Jews lived there. And although the ghetto was designed to confine and restrict and oppress the Jews thrived in the ghetto. Some of our greatest sages, some of the great scholars came from the culture of the ghetto. The Jews were very focused, concentrated, and we built synagogues. Here's just an ancient synagogue from a place called Trani. There were a number of great rabbis from Trani. We'll talk about them a little later. But medieval period synagogue, of course, is now been modernised. But in the Roman ghetto, also Jews in the ghettos were restricted in what type of trade. There were some popes the Jews in Rome, for example, who lived very close to the Vatican. Every single Shabbat, there was actually a priest would give a sermon in the synagogue, which the Jews would have to attend under pain of imprisonment if they didn't, in order to induce the Jews to convert. So there'd be a priest. The Jews would be forced to go to a class by a Christian missionary. Sometimes it was a born Christian, sometimes it was a born-again Christian, i.e. a Jew who converted to Christianity. And Jews were forced to attend this. There were also restrictions on the trade of the Jews. In the Roman ghetto, for example, the Jews were only allowed one primary trade, which was old clothing. Dealing in old used clothing. And here is the Jewish Museum in Rome. These are, I don't know if you can see it behind the glass, but these are Torah mantles. What the Jews would do, we'd trade in the old clothes, but the most beautiful pieces of clothing, they'd make covers for the Torah scrolls. So, just to give you an idea, there, Torah scroll covers. And that's just one section. There's actually a few rooms like that. There's one of them, which is, you can't actually see it, no, you can't see it here. One of them is interesting, I saw it there, it's actually, it's got the Swedish royal symbols on it. Here's a Torah scroll, so, because a princess of Sweden had died in Rome. And so the Jews bought her dress. And since it was quite beautiful, magnificent fabric, even though it had the Swedish royal symbol, they made a Torah scroll cover out of it. So what's that saying in English? If life gives you lemons,
make lemonade.
Make lemonade. So they gave us old clothing. We made Torah scrolls, and the Jewish life despite the oppression, Jewish life thrived. And there were a lot of Jews who were quite acculturated, and there were certain, by the way, also should point out that although the church made various edicts about you're not allowed to have a Jewish physician, you're not allowed to have, Jews not allowed to do this, do that, the country in which these edicts were ignored the most was Italy. So at the time when there was an edict, for instance, against having a Jewish physician, Pope Urban had a Jewish physician. So this was not uncommon. And also, one of the only colleges, universities in Europe that was open to Jews was the very famous University of Padua. The University of Padua had a medical school, and it was open to Jews, and it had a huge impact. A lot of Jews went there and studied medicine. There was even a couple of Jewish rabbis who were professors there in Italy. This is one of the synagogues, the Spanish synagogue. Jews came to Italy, of course. As I said, the Inquisition came to parts of Italy, but the Inquisition was most intense in Spain, and a lot of Jewish refugees from the Inquisition came to Italy, specifically to Naples, the Kingdom of Naples. One of the most famous was Don Isaac Abarbanel. Don Isaac Abarbanel had been he was a famous and very great rabbi who wrote commentary on the Torah, prophets and writings and many, many books of philosophy, and he was the financial advisor to the kings and queens of Spain. Later on, he moved to Portugal. He became financial advisor to the King and Queen of Portugal. After the Inquisition forced his expulsion from Spain, he went to Italy, and eventually he was employed as a financial advisor by the King of Naples. So the Abarbanel was quite an amazing person, and there he was in Italy. Many Jews came to Italy, and of course, the reason this synagogue is called the Spanish synagogue is the Jews of Spanish-Portuguese descent built this synagogue in Rome, and hence it's called the Spanish synagogue, even though, of course, no one there, they're all Italian, no one there is from Spain. So you had a period, ups and downs, as I said. The Inquisition remained enforced, by the way, until the 19th century. There were various popes, some enforced the Inquisition laws, some did not. There was actually, in the Vatican, they changed the name of the Inquisition to a different name. It was called the Doctrinal Council. So what used to be called the Inquisition was changed to the Doctrinal Council. One of the heads of the Doctrinal Council was a Cardinal Ratzinger. Anyone heard of Cardinal Ratzinger? Huh? No. He was the Pope. He was the head of the Doctrinal Council. Now, of course, but again, when Napoleon invaded Italy, he gave the Jews equal rights, and he allowed the Jews out of the ghetto, etc. Unfortunately, when he lost and was driven out and was conquered, so various popes, the popes afterwards put the Jews back in ghettos and made the restrictions back again. The yellow star was something which various popes had asked the Jews, not asked, but required the Jews to wear. In Italy, Jews had to have special permission to live in various places. So it was not easy. With the unification of Italy and the establishment of the Italian Republic, as soon as the power left the hands of the church, the Jews had greater freedom. Except in Rome, which still had the very powerful influence of the Vatican, the Jews in Italy were freed. And eventually, when King Vittorio Emanuele became the king of all of Italy, he allowed the Jews of Rome out of the ghetto, and the Jews have very tremendous respect and gratitude towards Vittorio Emanuele. This was a synagogue built in Rome. This is the exterior of that Spanish synagogue. This is the interior of the Great Synagogue of Rome. I'm sorry about the... it's a little blurry. That's the interior of the Great Synagogue. I davened there, actually. It's so interesting because, the Jews of Rome, so here it's Hebrew, but you can hear in a little Italian. When they say Amen, it's Amen. It's not, you hear Ashkenaz will say Amen, and Sephardim will say Amen, right? And the Italian is Amen. So it's great. It's a little Italian flavour to the Judaism there. And there are traditional... By the way, although I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the idea that what's called Ashkenaz and Sfard, i.e. there is the Ashkenaz or the European Jewish style of prayer, which has got very, the Siddur. Most of you probably will use an Ashkenaz Siddur in your synagogues. Ashkenaz is the old biblical name for Germany, and so that's the European Jewish custom. Then you've got Sfardim. The Sfardim are Jews of Morocco and Yemen, it was really technically not Sfardim, Eidot HaMizrach, which means the communities of the East, the Jews of North Africa and the Middle East, they have their own form of prayer, which we today colloquially call Nusach Sfard, which means Spain. But there's a third, which is what's called Nusach Italia. And the Italian Jews have their own unique Siddur. They have their own unique Siddur, they have their own unique pronunciation and their own unique tunes. And it's very beautiful to hear it. They have this. If you want to hear it, if you go to Jerusalem, there's 4 Italian synagogues in Jerusalem, and the 4 Italian synagogues in Jerusalem, there they have traditional Italian nusach, the traditional Italian format of prayer. There's Nusach Romi. I have a siddur. Actually, I lent it to someone, and I don't have it anymore. But I did have a siddur I bought. There's a great bookstore in Rome called the Menorah Bookstore, a large Jewish bookstore in which has huge amounts of Jewish books translated into Italian. And I bought a siddur there, a Roman Jewish siddur, and very beautiful. I showed it to a very close friend of mine who's of Italian origin. You probably know Rabbi Jonathan Rieti. In fact, Rieti is a town in Italy. That's his family's named after that town. His father, Robert Rieti, is actually a knight of the Italian Empire. He was knighted by the King of Italy, and he is. It's called a cavalier, I think, a cavallero or something like. I forgot the term in Italian, but his father, Robert Rieti, is quite a famous actor and does a lot of voiceovers, was knighted in Italy. And so he is really Sir Robert Rieti, and their family actually traces itself back quite a few generations back in Italy, and this is the so I don't know where they prayed. This was built in about 1870 with Vittorio Emanuele, and it's the Jews most of all in Rome lived along the banks of the Tiber River, in that where the ghetto was, and that's where actually the Great Synagogue is right near there. That's the outside of the Great Synagogue. It's magnificent. It's a beautiful building, and in the basement you might, when you go, if you want to go there, but in the basement that's where the Jewish Museum of Rome is situated, in the basement of that synagogue, and it's magnificent to see lots of beautiful stuff there, etc. That's another view of the synagogue from the front of the synagogue. Here are some of the famous. You can see a little Italian there, right? These are some famous rabbis. Obviously, I don't have pictures of lots of them, but this is Menachem Azaria Defano. And he was one of the greatest Kabbalists. He was responsible for spreading much of the Kabbalah, the mystical teachings of Rabbi Isaac Luria and Rabbi Chaim Vital through Italy and eventually into Europe. He was responsible for spreading those, and he wrote a very famous book which is still used and referenced today. It's called Asara Ma'amarot, 10 statements or 10 essays by Rabbi Menachem Azaria Defano. We'll talk more about Rav Moshe Chaim Zalman. I have no idea if that's how he looked. That's the standard. You open any Jewish encyclopedia or anything like that, that's the picture of Lozato that you'll see. Highly unlikely that that's accurate. Highly unlikely it's accurate. He probably did not wear a turban, and we also know that he trimmed his beard. So I put it there just for the heck of it, but it's probably not a good representation. He trimmed his beard, etc. And here is Eliyahu ben Amozeg. He was a rabbi. He was actually one of the heads of the rabbinical school in Livorno. And Eliyahu ben Amozeg lived in the late 19th, early 20th century. He was a scholar and a philosopher. Very fascinating. There was a French philosopher called Ami Pallier. Anyone heard of Ami Pallier? Probably. Okay. He wasn't that famous. Ami Pallier, French philosopher. And during the period of the First World War and just after, he was investigating Judaism, religion, etc. And he decided, based on his investigation, he had been a secular non-Jew, an atheist actually, and he decided that Judaism was true, and he wanted to convert to Judaism. So he corresponded with Eliyahu ben Amozeg in Italy, who he knew was a great rabbi and a philosopher, so he could speak to him in philosophical terminology that have a common language. And he wrote to him and he says, I want to convert. Ben Amozeg writes back to him, why? He said, well, I believe Judaism is true. He says, so? Doesn't mean you have to convert. He says, Judaism doesn't believe that you have to be Jewish to have a relationship with God. You could be a righteous and pious non-Jew and also have a relationship with God, and there's no need for you to convert. So he says, yes, but the non-Jews only have 7 commandments, right? The 7 Noahide laws. That's hardly a religion or a philosophy. So Ben Amozeg writes back, what are you talking about? The Noahide laws are an entire religion and an entire philosophy designed by God for non-Jews. And he said, well, and they have a correspondence, letters between Amil Pallier and I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly, so sorry, excuse my French, but Ami Palier and Eliyahu ben Amozeg, called the Ben Amozeg Epistles, and that was actually formed into a book called Israel and Humanity, which is a book of philosophy and Kabbalah about what the Jewish religion is for the non-Jewish world. Fascinating book. It's Eliyahu ben Amozeg, and you can see the Italian Jews, Italian Jewish scholars were very conversant in both worlds: the world of secular world, the world of science, the world of art, as well as Torah. This is a modern day scholar, Umberto Cassuto, who actually lived in the 20th century. He moved from Italy to Israel in the 30s, and he became a professor at Hebrew University. There's a few streets in Israel named after him. Cassuto Street in Bayit Vegan in Jerusalem. Umberto Cassuto was a brilliant Bible scholar. He was a brilliant Hebraist and a great Bible scholar, and he gave his most famous work, which is, I highly recommend, even though it's old, it's from the 50s, I think. It's called 8 Lectures on the Documentary Hypothesis, in which he gave a very famous 8 lectures at Hebrew University about the documentary hypothesis, Bible criticism, in which he, step by step, based on his knowledge of Hebrew, destroys each pillar of proof of the documentary hypothesis of Wellhausen, the Bible criticism, and he destroys them utterly. It's like a magnificent piece of work, and to Umberto Cassuto. There's been other famous Jews. We'll see some of the other rabbis. Here we go. Here's a partial list of Italian Jewish scholars. I'm sure many of you some of you may have studied some of their works, but don't know that they're Italian. One of the earliest was Ovadia Sforno, who I'm not sure how you pronounce it, because in Hebrew it's written Samach Pei Reish Nun Vav. Some people pronounce it Sforno, some Sipurno. I think probably soprano, but that has negative associations with Americans, so we prefer to say Sforno. And he wrote one of the most beautiful and amazing commentaries on the Torah, Ovadia Sforno. He was also, by the way, a physician. Not only was he a physician, he taught medicine at University of Padua, I believe it was. We have the Maharam of Padua, who wrote extensive responsa. That's rabbinic responses to questions. Isaac de Trani, his son and grandson, were very, very famous. The Maharit and others from Trani. They had the Winter Olympics there a number of years ago. So that's where he was from. Emmanuel of Rome, very great statesman and scholar. The earliest ever dictionary of Aramaic was written in Rome by Rav Nathan of Rome. It is called Rav Nosson Bala Aruch. It's called the Aruch, which means the arrangement, and it's an alphabetical dictionary of the Aramaic language, from Aramaic into Hebrew, a little Italian thrown in, and it is for scholars of Talmud for years and years, since about 1300 when it was written. This has been one of the great sources of understanding of the Talmud, because as a dictionary, obviously, when he's defining a word, and it's in the context of a statement in the Talmud, it's going to give you a tremendous amount of information about the Talmud and about his ideas. Isaac Lampronti wrote the first dictionary ever of the Talmud was written in Rome, and Isaac Lampronti, who wrote the first encyclopedia of Jewish law, it's 9 volumes, and it's called Pachad Yitzchak, the Fear of Isaac, and that is also an Italian Jew. The most famous commentary on the Mishnah, it is called Ovadia of Bartanura. Bartanura is a place in Italy. There's a wine named after that today. Right? Everyone have Bartanura? Right, it's a wine, Moscato d'Asti or whatever it's called. Anyway, and so Ovadia of Bartanura was one of the great commentaries in the Mishnah. He eventually made Aliyah, moved to Israel, and aside from his commentary on the Mishnah, it's also very famous, the beautiful letters he wrote to his children from Israel to Italy about the land of Israel. We have Hillel of Verona, and Rabbi Yeshua Bar Mavorach, Masorah. Oh yes, anyone who's ever studied Talmud, you'll see on the side of the page of Talmud, every time there's a quote, every time anything in the Talmud is found anywhere else in the entire 22 or so volumes of the Talmud, it is cross-referenced. Any verse that's quoted in the Talmud is cross-referenced to the Torah, prophets and writings. Those cross-references were done by one person in the 15th century without the aid of a computer or a CD-ROM, and his name was Rabbi Yeshua Boaz Mavorach, who wrote the Masoret Hashas and the Ein Mishpat and the Ner Mitzvah. Amazing, amazing work when you consider to cross-reference over 3,000 pages of densely written material without the aid of computers, just using his memory, is quite amazing. And that's still used today. I'm sure the rabbis, Rabbi Sarabowski and Miller, are familiar with this. Here's an Italian rabbi that used Menachem Rekanati, great Kabbalist. Surah of Menachem, the Ramchal, Rabosh Zato, who we're going to talk about extensively. David Pardo, one of the great commentaries. It's what we call a super commentary. That means Rashi wrote a commentary on the Torah, but you probably know there are over 27 commentaries on Rashi. So it's called a super commentary. You've got a commentary and then a super commentary. So Rabbi David Pardo, Azari Garossi, philosopher Chaim Vital, the great student of Rabbi Isaac Luria, was an Italian Jew. Eliyahu ben Amozig, I mentioned, Umberto Cassuto. These are just this is really a selection of Italian Jewish scholars. So as you can see, there was a tremendous amount of Jewish scholarship despite the ghettos, maybe even because of them, despite the oppression, maybe because of it. There was a great person once said, Italy had over 1,000 years of warfare, plague, corruption, internal strife, assassinations, just horrific stuff, rebellions, revolts, invasions. And what did they produce during that time? Unbelievable stuff. Leonardo da Vinci and Vivaldi and Michelangelo, and unbelievable. Switzerland during the same period had peace, tranquility and democracy, and what did they produce? Clocks and chocolate. Cuckoo clocks and chocolate. Right. So there's something to be said for adversity. Now, we also have some of the oldest Jewish collection of Jewish books in the world is found in Italy. This is one of the oldest transcripts of the Talmud, which is found in the Vatican. The Vatican has a huge collection of Judaica, much of which, many of the works that we use today, not many, some of the works that we use today in Talmudic scholarship actually are works that were the Vatican allowed scholars to photocopy and to produce these works. One of them is the most famous, the Meiri, and other commentaries which were found in the Vatican library. Obviously, it's not completely open to anyone. We don't know what's in there completely, but there's been a fair amount of stuff published from there. The first ever Talmud was printed in Italy. Italy was of course the centre of printing for a long time. The first ever complete printed Talmud, the first ever Chumash Bible printed, the first ever Rashi printed, all done in Italy. And the first person to print the Talmud, the complete Talmud, was Daniel Bomberg of Venice. And it was printed in 15... Daniel Bomberg was not Jewish, by the way, because printing presses could not be in the hands of Jews. They had to be in the hands of non-Jews, because Jews obviously could not be trusted. Who knows what we'd do? So, but this was the first... And as you see, the page, that famous layout of the page of Talmud was actually done by this printer, Daniel Bomberg. That's a page of the Bomberg. That actually is the famous Westminster Abbey Bomberg Talmud. I know that sounds bizarre, but... So, just to give you the idea, Westminster Abbey had a complete set of the Bomberg Talmud, 1520. Can you imagine how much that's worth? It's worth tens of millions of dollars, a complete set. There's a Jew in Lakewood who actually has I think, 15 volumes of the complete 30-volume set. So that's not bad. But this is a fascinating story. There was a Jew called Jack Lanzer in London. His father was a fabulously wealthy traditional Jew from South Africa. And his father left him huge, like billions and billions, unbelievable amount of money, you can't even imagine, right? And there was a condition to the will, which is he had to build a collection of Jewish books, ancient Jewish books. So Lanzer set to work buying every Jewish book he could find. So, I know someone, this guy in Lakewood, who actually goes to these auctions. He said, you go to an auction, let's say a Sotheby's, where their auction goes to, so Lanzer would sit there with his paddle up. At first bit, he'd put his paddle up, and he'd just hold it up. So he'd fall asleep, his paddle would be up, and so, as soon as this guy would walk in, everyone would say, oh, forget it. Right, so he'd just buy it. He had a collection of 30,000 ancient Jewish books. Some of them he rebound. It was on display in Sotheby's. The curator at Sotheby's told me, she said it was the most popular display they've ever had in Sotheby's, New York. It's called the Val Madonna collection. He had a library in London. He sold much of the collection. Sotheby's is now selling it. Now, this guy, Jack Lanzer, he's a diamond merchant. So what happens is he's buying diamonds in Africa. Okay, and so during the time he's buying diamonds, what happened is that in London, a Jewish collector from New York was in England buying manuscripts, and he came across a Latin manuscript. And the Latin manuscript was before I get there, so this guy Lanza had been trying to buy the Westminster Abbey's magnificent complete set, mint condition. Look at that. That's from 1520, right? I mean, that's unbelievable condition. So they had a whole set, beautiful leather binding in Westminster Abbey in England, which was donated to Westminster Abbey by a non-Jewish scholar of Talmud in the 16th century, because he gave it to Westminster Abbey. So they were not willing to sell it. This guy wants to buy it. So anyway, in the meantime, while he's in Africa, what happens is it's uncovered, a Latin manuscript's uncovered in England, and a Jew from New York, a collector of antiquities, buys it. Turns out the Latin manuscript is the charter of Westminster Abbey. The charter of Westminster Abbey. So now the English Antiquities Commission says he can't take it out of the country. He can own it, but he can't take it out of the country because it's too valuable to English heritage to take out of the country. So here's this New York Jew who just bought this, and he can't take it out of the country. Anyway, Lanza gets onto the plane. His flight was delayed. They didn't have time to clean the plane. He's taken from wherever he was, Tanzania. He gets on the plane. In the seat in front of him, there's a copy of the Telegraph from London that had been flown that day, and he sees the story about this manuscript. As soon as he lands, he tells his broker, I want you to buy the manuscript, I don't care how much it costs. So he buys the Westminster Abbey Charter. As soon as he buys it, he phones Westminster Abbey. He says, I've got something you want, you've got something I want. I've got a Latin manuscript, which is the Charter of Westminster Abbey. I have no interest in this whatsoever. He says, you've got a copy of the Talmud. You have no interest in that. He says, let's do a trade. So they did a trade. There was a few million added to the trade. But basically, the Talmud now came from Westminster Abbey into Jewish hands once again. And now that's how he got it. That's why it's in the Val Madonna collection in Sotheby's. I studied with a guy he was buying some Chagall's, so I got a behind-the-scenes tour of Sotheby's, and we got to see we went to the vault. They have the flag from Custer's Last Stand. This ripped, partially burnt American flag. Unbelievable stuff to have there. But, that's just, I figure your Americans would be interested in that. Okay, anyway, so now we talk about printing in Italy. One of the most famous Jewish printing presses was actually the Sonsino family in Italy. And the Sonsino family, there was a castle in the area, in the city where they lived, and this was the symbol of their printing press. Today there is still a Sonsino press, and they still use this symbol. And so printing of Jewish books in Italy was very famous. When I was a student in Israel at yeshiva, so I went to I used to go around to bookstores, so I found this book. I paid, I think it was about $20 at the time. No, it was about $15 at the time for this book. Turns out it's from 1740 in Italy, and on it says it's of the Fratelli Sforni. The Sforni brothers own this, and they lived in Saronia, Italy. So here's a book printed, and it's interesting. It's printed in Mantua. And it says it's printed in the printing press of Dr. Raphael Chaim of Italy. So there's fitting name for a Dr. Raphael, which means that's the angel that heals. So his name's Raphael Chaim, and he also owned a printing press. And underneath it says in Latin, "Con licta superior," with license of the authorities, because any Jewish book had to be censored first of all. So they had to be reviewed and censored by the church authorities before they were able to distribute. You can have a look at this afterwards. It's just a beautiful thing to hold. 17. I was told by a good friend of mine who works as a consultant for Sotheby's that it's not worth much because there's sellotape inside it and there's some pages missing. But it's still cool to have something from 1740 in Italy. So Sonsino Press, very famous. Just the Wikipedia article about them. The instructions on Sino, just fascinating. It moved all over the place. They really published a tremendous. This is all the places where this is the Casal Maggiore, is the castle which is the symbol of their printing press, and they had a very beautiful printing. And the first ever Hebrew Bible was actually printed in Italy by the Sonsinos. So a tremendous amount of what we have comes from Italy. Modern day Italy, of course, the Jews stayed in Italy after, as I said, Vittorio Emanuele liberated, so to speak, the Jews. So the Jewish community increased in Italy. As you know, Libya was once controlled by Italy. It was once part of the Italian Empire, and with the independence of Libya, so two events. First of all, a lot of Jews had to leave Libya and many Arab countries in 1948 when the State of Israel was founded, because there were riots and pogroms in all the Arab countries. So most Jews fled at that time. There were 500,000 Jews who fled Arab countries in 1948. No one ever talks about them, but there's lots of Jewish refugees too. Many of the Jews of Libya went naturally to Italy, the mother country of what was controlling Libya. 67 more Jews left. When Gaddafi became the head of Libya, he expelled the remaining Jews, and so there's a very large Libyan Jewish community in Rome. So you've got the old Roman Italian Jews, you've got Jews of Spanish Portuguese origin who came via the Inquisition, and then you've also got Jews today of Libyan descent. The Second World War came along. As you know, Mussolini, the fascists, took over, but it's interesting, of virtually any country in Europe, with the exception, I think, of Norway, the smallest percentage of Jews were actually murdered. The Italians, on the whole, many Italians were sympathetic towards the Jews. Many Italians helped the Jews, and so the transportation was not quite as terrible. There was so a lot of Jews remained alive, and Jews stayed in Italy after the war. Italy, after the war, became a great transit point for Jews to go to the land of Israel. The Haganah, which was one of the Jewish illegal armies under the British, they organised what's called Aliyah Beit, which was the illegal Aliyah. The British stopped Jews coming to Israel. And so a lot of Jews came to Israel. They got boats from Italy to the land of Israel. It is interesting. I don't know if anyone's read the book called The Brigade. Anyone know the book called The Brigade? Fascinating. The Brigade was the Jewish brigade. That was Jews, Palestinian Jews, in other words, Jews from Israel, who were called Palestinian Jews at that time. The British did not want Jews in their army, because they didn't want to give these guys military training, because they'd become the Israeli army, which they did. But they eventually let them in, and they created what's called the Jewish Brigade. They sent them to Italy towards the end of the war, and they fought in Italy. The Jewish Brigade was still in Italy after the war, and what they did was they would go around. They had trucks, they had ammunition. They would go around Europe executing Nazis. They'd find a Nazi, they'd execute the Nazi. They'd read him his crimes, and they'd just shoot him in the head, execute him, just like that. So this is what they did for a while. So what happens is that the Jewish Brigade, they found a Nazi who was disguised as a priest, who was acting as a priest in the church. And they walked into the church to kill this guy. And there's a little girl in the church, and she sees these guys in British Army uniforms with Magen Davids on the shoulder. And she runs over to them, and she says, "I'm Jewish. Are you here to take me to Israel? Are you here to take me to Eretz Israel?" And they say, "Oh, that's not what we're here for. We're here to kill this guy." But that incident transformed. They decided that would it not be more productive for them to use their logistical abilities, to use their power, to use their trucks, etc., to save Jewish children and bring them to Israel, than to kill Nazis. So they transformed. Instead of going out and taking vengeance by killing Nazis, which I don't think is a bad thing, but instead of doing that, what they did was they started to save Jewish children who were in non-Jewish families and scattered around Europe, etc., and they started to bring them to the land of Israel. It's amazing. It's a book called The Brigade. Highly recommend it. Fantastic book. The story is an amazing story. So Italy became a tremendous transit point. I have a close friend whose parents, his father worked in the Haganah. He was a soldier in the Haganah before 48, and his wife from Europe was working in a transit camp in Italy, helping to send. They were both helping. They met there, and she used to make every Pesach this cake, which my friend used to call the ghetto. Because she used to make it was basically slices of matzah with chocolate syrup in between, baked. So he called it the ghetto because she used to make this on special occasions in the transit camps in Italy. So he called it the ghetto. Anyway, my father, Oliver Sholem, when he got out of Russia after the war, he made his way to Sweden. And from Sweden, he was able to bribe his way to get a visa to Italy. And in Italy, he was able to get a visa to Australia. And he got on a boat in Italy. And Italy was a transit point not just to Israel, but to really for Jews to escape Europe and to go, because he and other people, he wanted to get as far away from Europe as possible. He went to Australia, and he was on the boat. There was a group of Lubavitcher Hasidim from Lubavitch in Lithuania, the first group of Lubavitchers sent by the Rebbe to Australia. And so he was on the boat with them. Later on, one of them became my teacher in high school, who was on the boat with my father, Oliver Sholem. So it's quite amazing. Anyway, the community in Italy stayed on. As I said, the Roman Jews, there are Libyan Jews, there are Spanish Portuguese Jews. There are still Jews who live in the ghetto area. Here you've got, this is, if you ever go to Rome, you must eat here. La Taverna, Jewish Roman cuisine developed in the ghetto is very unique. They have certain dishes, Roman Jewish artichoke. It's amazing. It is deep fried artichoke whole in olive oil with spices. It looks like a flower when they serve it. It is unbelievably good. Salted cod. I know this doesn't sound great, but it's salted cod baked with pine nuts and olives. It's wild stuff. The cuisine has some recipes here, but I'm not going to read them to you because I will probably faint. But they're into things like the fish market. Because they were right near the river, the fish market was in the ghettos. There's a lot of mullet, bream, sea bass cooked in sweet and sour sauce. Beef used to be salted, peppered and dried and was used by the Roman Jews on the Yom Tovim. They had a cake called bolo, which is a soft spongy cake with raisins and candied fruits. And there's something called Jewish pizza. If you go to Rome and there's what's called Jewish pizza is sweet pizza with almonds, raisins and pine nuts. It is really good. It's really good. Anyway, so if you want traditional Roman Jewish cuisine, and a lot of the traditional Roman cuisine is really Jewish, you go to this place, La Taverna del Ghetto, the tavern in the ghetto, and it's just, amazing stuff. I sat there. First of all, there was a family of Italian Jews came in, and I was sitting there, the kids, the way they ate the spaghetti, I was sitting there like, because they twisted around the fork like with such skill. It's like, you ever been to you eat a restaurant, you watch like Chinese people use chopsticks, right? And you're like, wow, how do they do that? So I'm looking at these guys. And these little kids are eating spaghetti. It's amazing. So fascinating to see. And this is a very famous Jewish bakery in the ghetto. There's a little closer view. What this says is specialata, or specialty, dolci e braici, which means Jewish sweets available on order. They're a special, that's Jewish pizza, but I bought a whole bunch of this stuff. I took it back to my hotel, gorged myself silly. It was unbelievable. The food is great. And it was amazing. In the kosher restaurant there, they had a huge selection of wines, which I'd never seen anywhere else, like kosher Italian wines, but which I'd never seen anywhere else. Later on, I came back to the States. I saw in New Jersey, I saw Dolcemente, which is really cheap but fantastic wine from Italy, and it's just amazing to see. Here is this is the ghetto. The Jews still hang out there. The main Jewish school in Rome is in the ghetto. There's about 30,000 Jews in Rome. By the way, Venice has a great restaurant called Gum Gum. That means also and also. And they are open on Shabbat. You buy tickets ahead of time if you want to eat there on Shabbat. Chabad has free meals for any tourists who want to come there on Shabbat in Venice. So and you eat it's fantastic. My sister was there, my niece has been there, and a bunch of people have been there. Fantastic food, but you will not starve. I'm telling you, there, unbelievable. There's a restaurant called Yotvata, which is dairy. I don't think I've ever had so much cholesterol in one sitting. but it was really, really delicious, really delicious. But here, basically, is the ghetto. This is actually a plaque on the old Jewish school. As you can see, it's got a verse from Lamentations, which says, "Listen to me, all nations, and look at my pain. My virgins and my young boys, have been taken into captive." And it's actually a commemoration to 122 children who were taken by the Nazis from the school and killed in concentration camps. And that's the commemoration. But here are Jewish kids in Rome. I went there. I would hang out when school would come out and get it, because all the parents are out there sipping espressos. and schmoozing, and the kids are out there playing soccer in the street. And you see there's these Italian, and they're all speaking Italian, which should not be surprising because they're Italian, right? But I mean, it's type of cool, right, to sit there and see Jews in the old Italian Jewish ghetto going to a Jewish school learning Hebrew, right, playing soccer, and the old Italian Jewish, well, they're Italian, they're Italians, they're Jews, so they have right, every feature of the Italian mother, Jewish mother, all combined in one. Unbelievable, right? And this is a place where the Jews will sit and eat, drink espresso, etc. Anyway, that's a little bit of the. By the way, I should point out, Gateways. We have a seminar coming up on December 3rd and 24th, which is Shabbat Hanukkah, and it's going to be in Somerset, New Jersey, not far from here, I believe. How far is it?
It's about 60, 70 miles.
Oh, is it? That's close. Anyway, DoubleTree Hotel, Somerset, New Jersey. We'll have the usual 3 tracks: advanced, beginners, intermediate. And we have all the regular food. It might be Italian food, but it'll be Jewish food. What can I say? And you'll not get the deep fried artichoke or salted cod with pine nuts or Jewish pizza, but you will get regular other Jewish food. And I strongly encourage you to speak to Rabbis Serebrowski and Miller about it. Go onto the website, gatewaysonline.org. You'll see an advertisement for it there. You'll have a great time. There are many people here who've been to Gateway seminars, so etc. And anyone's interested, my book, Gateway to Judaism, is available, and Amazon, ArtScroll, Jewish bookstores, etc. So that's it. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take questions.